Hi again, everyone. This is Bruce Moravchik, coordinator for the NOAA Planet Stewards Education Project, and I'm glad to welcome you to our March webinar, Engaging Students Toward Stewardship the MWEE Way. We have some information here on our opening screen that you should pay attention to in the event that you lose connection with the webinar or in the event that you have trouble listening using voice over internet protocol. You can dial in with a phone, but you will be charged for the call. We'll start with Bart Merrick's presentation in just a moment, but first, some information for you. So we will be recording this evening's webinar, and we're going to be sending you links to the archive within about a week or sooner. If you don't receive a link, please send me an email with the subject, request a link to the March 2018 webinar. Now, so you know, all the slides that will be presented here tonight and of previous broadcasts going back to 2013 are currently available on the NOAA Planet Stewards Google website. If you can't access this site, you can send an automated request through Google, or you can send me an email with the subject request access to the PSEP Google site. I know what it'll refer to. We'll get you that information. There are tens of excellent presentations that are offered, and over the next couple of months, we're going to be doing our best to get a lot of them on our public website. So for this evening, all the microphones are going to be muted. If you would like to ask Bart, myself, or someone else a question, please type it into your GoToWebinar control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Now, during tonight's broadcast, you'll be receiving an email with a link to a post-webinar survey. We really appreciate you going to your email right after you're done here and just answering it straight away. It's only going to take no more than 2 minutes to go through everything. Very much appreciate the responses. They do provide us with important information for future broadcasts. Also, everyone who's attending this evening for the full period of time will be receiving a certificate of attendance via email, signifying that we recognize that you participated in one contact hour of professional development here. A couple of announcements. NOAA Planet Stewards, we will be at the National Science Teachers Association Conference, the national one, in Atlanta, Georgia, next week, March 15th to the 18th. On our website, you see the link over there. We've got a whole list of activities that we're going to be engaged in. These are just some of them. There are terrific presentations, a lot of hands-on interactive things. We're working to sponsor the AGU lecture, Chasing Coral Bleaching, Present and Growing Ecological Danger. We've got a happy hour. Don't want to miss that. Information on where and when it is on the website. Also, we're doing a half-day workshop series, a STEM and stewardship series. Polar Popsicles, we've got folks in from the United States Ice Core Drilling Program. We're going to be giving a presentation, and we've also got a special presentation on coral bleaching and using data on coral bleaching in the classroom. We've also have some of your colleagues that are going to be offering presentations on interactive three-dimensional learning with students collaborating on climate change, and all NOAA Climate Stewards are invited to a Friends of the Earth Science reception. That is going to be a wonderful time where NOAA Climate Stewards are in the program will be formally recognized by the National Earth Science Teachers Association. I'll be sending out a note about that. In addition, hey, save these dates. Monday, March 26th at 8 p.m., we've got our next book club, Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life. If you'd like to join this discussion, it's a really terrific book by E.O. Wilson, focusing on his premise that if we're going to save a majority of the species on Earth, including ourselves, human beings, that we're going to need to look and focus on making sure that approximately half the Earth maintains itself as some type of nature preserve. And on Monday, April 9th at 7:30 p.m., we're going to have our next webinar, Extreme Weather Preparedness. And we're going to have some terrific folks from NOAA's National Weather Service that are going to be presenting. We had originally scheduled it for this evening, but things happen. Regardless, You really should attend that webinar. That's going to be wonderful, as well as our next book club. If you have any questions about these things, you can, of course, email me. You can email my co-coordinator, Molly Harrison, and we'll be glad to help you out. But right now, I'm going to turn the comm over to, whoops, I am not doing that. Hang on. I'm going to turn the comm over to Bart Merrick, who's going to be offering his presentation today. And let me introduce Bart for a moment while he puts his presentation to full screen. Bart Merrick has been an environmental educator for really over 20 years. He's been working with teachers and students from Massachusetts to Virginia, promoting environmental literacy and fostering understanding, awareness, and respect for the natural world. He developed an appreciation for the many opportunities to learn and explore offered by Maryland's diverse environments, especially the Chesapeake Bay. Through his work with both living classrooms and the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Now, when he received his master's in environmental science from Johns Hopkins University, Bart went to work for the Maryland Department of Natural Resources as the education coordinator for the Chesapeake Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. But now he works for the NOAA Chesapeake Bay office and coordinates its Environmental Science Training Center in Oxford, Maryland. This is a program that strives to connect regional educators to NOAA and partner science and scientists. And with that, Bart, it's all yours.
All right, thank you,
Welcome.
Bruce. Yeah, thank you. And thanks to everybody that was able to call in. And I really appreciate your interest in this topic and one of the models for promoting environmental literacy that's out there, the meaningful watershed education experience. You know, one of the things that Bruce didn't mention in my my bio is that I am also I'm a current planet or climate steward. I actually, when I was working for the National Estuarine Research Reserve Program, was one of the first people to participate in that cohort. And it's a great program, so I thank you, Bruce, for the opportunity to talk to this group, and I look forward to just kind of sharing a model that we've developed to support environmental literacy in the Chesapeake. So just, you know, kind of to get us oriented, what I'm going to try and touch on during the course of this evening is just a quick little bit of background on, you know, the programs that we do in the NOAA Chesapeake Bay office and where the meaningful watershed education experience, or MWEE, came from. Then we're going to dig into it a little bit and kind of go over with as much detail as I think is appropriate to kind of just describe what the MWEE is and why we're doing them, and then provide a couple examples of what a MWEE actually looks like to hopefully round out the evening and give you a picture of what some folks are doing and implementing that is a MWEE. So the first thing is, yeah, like Bruce mentioned, I work for the NOAA Chesapeake Bay office, and like the rest of NOAA, we're focused and trying to support science, service, and stewardship. Our mission in the Chesapeake Bay office is to focus NOAA's resources in the Chesapeake Bay region. And what that looks like our science kind of revolves a little bit around fisheries science. We are a fisheries office, so we do a lot of work around oysters and blue crabs and supporting management thereof. We also have an observation system called the Chesapeake Bay Interpretive Buoy System, or CBIBS, which is, you know, in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay, taking observations right now. In terms of service, a lot of our work is around habitat restoration and, again, informing policy. And then in terms of the stewardship piece, we actually do quite a bit, I think, to support the education communities out there in the Chesapeake Bay region through training, through grant making, through supporting education-related policy, and even an internship program. And as Bruce mentioned also, I work at and kind of run a program called the NOAA Environmental Science Training Center. And pretty simply, all we're trying to do in this program is to connect regional scientists and their science to regional educators and their programming. With we develop a relationship between those two communities and support the integration of some of the more current science that's available and appropriate for education audiences into that programming. And I mean, the pictures are, the picture of the building that I work out of, and it's actually in a little town on the eastern shore of Maryland. So if you have what's called the Delmarva Peninsula, the eastern side of Maryland, one side of the Delmarva is the ocean, the other side is the Chesapeake Bay, and the town that I work out of is called Oxford, which is a quaint little town, kind of midway up that peninsula, just south of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, if you're familiar with the area. All right, so I'm sure all of us live in a place, and around those places that we live, there is an abundance of both natural beauty and human systems, cultures, and all that sort of stuff. And the Chesapeake Bay, like so many of the places where you all are, is also a really rich in history and natural beauty. It's an amazing place. If you've ever had the chance to check it out, I strongly suggest it. The Chesapeake Bay is the largest estuary in the United States, and it's a home to a vast number of plants, animals, and people. And that population of people especially is growing all the time. And as I'm sure many of us know, like, that does come with its challenges. So the health of the Chesapeake Bay, has multiple threats that it's exposed to. Poor water quality, coastal wetland habitats that are vulnerable to all kinds of change that we're experiencing, sea level rise, land use changes among them. There's many examples of aggressive invasive species that present challenges in our region, like blue catfish, which came over from the Mississippi and kind of wreaked some havoc with the food chain, food web that exists in many places of the Chesapeake. So, like other places, great spot, beautiful, lots of natural resources and human resources, but has its challenges. So I wanted to ask a question, and Bruce, if you could cue up question 1. I'm curious as to where other folks are from. So I phrase it, in terms of what watershed are you all coming from? And we couldn't capture every watershed, so I apologize for that. But if you're in one of these, go ahead and tick it, please.
And if you're in another watershed and would like to mention what it is to Bart, you can type it into your question box, and I'll read off any that are particularly interesting.
Make it interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so we've also got San Francisco Bay, Penobscot Bay, Maine, Great Lakes, Santa Cruz watershed. Wow, they are just coming in. A bunch of Delaware Bay, Carmel River watershed, Great Lakes. Oh, this is great. So we've got a lot of folks from the middle of the country up by the Great Lakes. Also a bunch on the West Coast, Tennessee River. Terrific. Very good. Great. Let's just take another moment or so for anybody who's voting. All right. And we'll close this up, and we'll see where people are. All right. So can you see this, Bart?
Yep, I got it. Thank you.
Very good.
And then all those questions, thank you for chiming in on the question part. That really, I love that geographic orientation, being able to see where people are. And, though I spend a lot of my time on the Chesapeake Bay, with family out on the West Coast and in the Great Lakes, so have a sense of what's going on there. And I appreciate your whole work in those areas too. So Bruce, do I just rest the control back here, or you hand it back?
Oh, I apologize. Yep, go right ahead now. You're back.
All right, I'm back. And let's see. Hold on. There we are. Thank you. All right. So San Francisco Bay, Delaware Bay, Great Lakes. Because they all have challenges, I am sure they all have strategies and programming that exists out there to try and manage some of those challenges and restore, protect whatever the environment might be for current and future generations. In the Chesapeake Bay region, the program that we have to help us manage the Chesapeake Bay and its natural resources is called the Chesapeake Bay Program. And the program, Chesapeake Bay Program, started back in 1983, and it is made up of stakeholders that hail from throughout the watershed. So all the states in the watershed have representation in the Chesapeake Bay program, as well as and so what that looks like is folks from New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, Delaware, Maryland, the district, all have game within the Chesapeake Bay program and representation. And the whole point of that is this program allows us to set goals and track progress toward those goals and hold each other accountable for those things we say we're going to do to try and maintain, protect, restore the Chesapeake Bay and the watershed. So what do those things look like? Well, the things that we're focused on are all called goals. So like the top level thing that everybody works on are called goals. And the goals are the things in red on this slide. So things like clean water, habitat, healthy watersheds, sustainable fisheries, and engaged community. And you can see in the bullet points underneath there some of the things that folks work on. This is not the full list, but these are some of the things that the folks work on and people throughout the watershed have agreed to work on and try and make some meaningful change around. But I did want to call people's attention to that lowest one on the screen, that engaged communities piece. And one of the goals underneath that is actually environmental literacy. So within the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed, a goal has been established to promote, foster, and support environmental literacy throughout the entire watershed. And this is what that goal actually looks like. So there's 3 parts to it. One focuses on students, and that goal is all about increasing students' understanding of the watershed through participation in teacher-supported, meaningful watershed education experiences and inquiry-based instruction. And the goal is, like the specifics of it are that in elementary, once in middle, and once in high school, within the entire will have the opportunity to access one of these meaningful watershed education experiences, with the caveat that if there's not enough resources to do so, we understand, but that's the goal. The other 2 parts, which I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on because that's not what this presentation is about, but are also pretty interesting, so I'll mention them quickly. The second goal within that literacy goal is sustainable schools. So that's working directly with schools to encourage building practices, the use of the school grounds for learning, and thinking about how schools impact local watersheds and doing what you can to make improvement in there. And then the third goal is about actually the planning goal. So that's what do you need, what do you have in place to support environmental literacy programming in your region or in your whatever district or what have you might work in. And that's an important one because I think many of us as educators know that without planning, it makes things really hard to implement down the road. So it's that kind of hat trick or that 3-legged stool of environmental literacy that we're trying to make happen. But again, that MWEE is the big thing. So that we have this environmental literacy goal, which promotes and tries to foster students graduating from high school with the knowledge, skills to act responsibly to protect and restore their local watershed. So we talk about the Chesapeake Bay watershed as a whole, but we're very conscious that folks up on the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania or in Cooperstown, New York, at the head of the Chesapeake Bay, may not be so enamored with the Chesapeake Bay itself, but certainly with the Susquehanna or the river that flows by them is more meaningful to that. And so this whole here is super important. We recognize that, we support it, and we're trying to do what we can to foster that. And it's a recognition fundamentally that there's this education landscape out there that consists of all kinds of educators, and we've been spending a lot of time working with primarily field-based educators and school-based educators. And we think about formal education, so the K-12 environment, happening in many, many environments, whether it's informal, whether it's in the classroom, or whether it's outside in the field. And we're trying to capture a lot of the interplay in education, particularly amongst those programming that's happening in the field, and that stuff that's happening in school. So how do we accomplish this goal? Well, that is the MWEE, or the Meaningful Watershed Education Experience. So fundamentally, and I think one of the points that I like to make about the MWEE is that it has parts, it has components to it, it has partners working on this thing, but really the MWEE is an approach that addresses the environmental literacy goal. So we look at it as a way of learning, teaching and learning, that will support students ultimately graduating and becoming and developing, is probably the best word, environmental literacy. And within the MWEE, we think about MWEEs as being being able to seamlessly connect standards based classroom learning with outdoor field investigations to provide a place-based, deeper understanding of both the content, but then also of the place where you live. So the second part is students explore local environmental issues through not just like field trips. And one of the things that we're trying to work with on the MWEEs is that field experiences in general are really positive. We want to encourage them as much as possible. But when you have the opportunity to stay in the programming around any field experience for a greater amount of time and a greater amount of depth, the power of that experience is increased. And just the MWEE did not just come out entirely out of the blue. A lot of things went into it, and we like to think that it is based on the best practices in environmental education. So things like the North American Association of Environmental Education has put out the guidelines for environmental ed and teacher professional development. That's all stuff that's brought into the MWEE as a whole. And we're going to dig into that in a little bit. But I just kind of wanted to do the quick timeline for the MWEE and where it actually came from. So I mentioned that the Chesapeake Bay program, the watershed agreement that guides the protection, restoration of the Chesapeake Bay, was initiated in 1983. It wasn't until 1998, over 10 years, 15 years later, that an education work group was established in the Bay program. And the cool thing about that is the recognition that it's not just the current generation that's going to have to manage the environment around them, it's also future generations. And so that education work group was charged with thinking about how do we support environmental literacy in those future generations. And it wasn't just kind of feds or state government type people. It was really a partnership, like the rest of the Bay program, of state education folks, local education agencies or district education folks, the nonprofit organizations that are out there in the Chesapeake Bay watershed that provide programming, natural resource folks, whether they're at parks or doing natural resource management. All these folks were involved with that education work group, and ultimately coming together and defining in 2001 what a meeting experience is. And that's at this time it was like students as part of their classwork getting outside and conducting field investigations. But it is evolved over time, and we'll get to that. But just the next timeline piece is recognizing that MWEEs, they don't come for free. There was a lot of interest in, let's find a way to actually support the initial development of models for meaningful watershed education experience. And that's one of the programs that we run out of the Chesapeake Bay office is called BWET, or Bay Watershed Education and Training Program, which was initially developed and put together to help fund and support meaningful watershed education experiences. And later, partners of ours and other funders within the region, like the Chesapeake Bay Trust, that gets their funding through the license plates with the pictures of the Chesapeake Bay on it. And I'm sure a lot of other jurisdictions, I think, have similar things. And that money goes directly, part of that money goes directly to support environmental literacy programming or MWEEs. And there's been a lot of action lately. Because in 2014, periodically, the Chesapeake Bay Agreement is updated. It's one of those adaptive management things. So if things change or conditions on the ground change, you need to be able to update things. And one of those updates in 2014 actually formally that goal that I was just talking about a couple slides back, established that environmental literacy goal. And this really was a significant thing, because it was not just folks that are engaged in the environmental literacy effort, promoting environmental literacy as a goal for the Bay program, but it was actually the governors and other resource and government and state and political people all kind of agreeing and signing on to environmental literacy being a goal of the Bay Agreement and what's happening. And there's some nuances in there which I won't go into, but but still, it's a goal in the whole program. And then just last year, we released what I'm going to call out at the end of this presentation, the MWEE guide, which is designed to help practitioners, teachers, educators out there in the watershed implement MWEEs. And I mean, I realize that we are on the phone right now. We're a national audience, and so I'll mention right now that one of the things that we, hope for the MWEE is that it is a model for environmental literacy programming. And so, although a lot of just what we call the MWEE was generated in the Chesapeake Bay region, it was really influenced by national efforts. So it's a model that comes out of a lot of really great thinking throughout the country. And one of those things is the Natural Resource Council's work about how people learn. And this document, if you haven't had a chance to look at it ever, it's totally worth pulling up and checking out, because there's a lot of great information in there, and provides some really, I think, powerful insight into what makes for really solid teaching and what we can expect to get out of that. And so research really tells us that learning, like as it normally occurs, is a function of an activity. The context and the culture in which that all occurs. So learning is situated. It doesn't really happen all the time from reading, or it doesn't really happen all the time from videos, but it's about people and a place where it all happens. So and this document calls this out, right? How people learn. And that kind of contrasts with a lot of classroom activities which involve knowledge only, really is kind of abstract and out of context. So like a lot of other education reform efforts, a lot's going on there. And MWEEs we actually consider to be a mechanism for helping teachers shift toward approaches to teaching and learning that situate learning in contexts in which the learning is actually immediately applicable and transferable. So you're actually doing something about, so you're trying to understand how watersheds work and how water quality might change based on what's happening upstream in the watershed. You see evidence of this, whether it's sediment or a bunch of dirty water coming down, and then you can apply some of that knowledge in a meaningful way in thinking about how can we address some of these issues down the road. So essentially the MWEE supports this type of learning through field-based investigations into local and life-relevant issues. And the MWEE aligns nicely, I think, with goals such as next generation science standards. With the focus being learning for life, more so than learning for school. And that's a really powerful shift that is happening throughout the education world. And within the MWEE context, we're trying to capture that. And so what does that actually look like? And for folks of you that are in states that have adopted next generation science standards, this might look relatively familiar. For those that are somewhere on the continuum of adopting that, it might look familiar. And for those that are not necessarily in that wheelhouse, these are great things to think about. And so there's a document out there called a new vision for science education. And basically, as you can see in the document that I did a screenshot of, that we can see what science education will involve less of and what is more. And basically, like I was talking about in that example of cloudy water and a local stream, facts, turbidity, maybe calling it in that little stream, they're learned as needed. So there's not, vocab lists that you need to pull out and memorize, but you learn the language and the ability to communicate about that stuff as it's needed. Looking at systems as a whole, as opposed to individual parts pulled out of context, is also key within NextGen and within the MWEE. Answers with questions with fixed answers are shied away from a little bit more, and more open-ended questions and offering the opportunity for discussion is key to NextGen, and multiple sources of information, so that it's not just textbook that gives you the information, but there's so many different perspectives, so many different values at play, and so many environmental, especially topics, that multiple sources of info are key. And then some of the most powerful pieces, in my mind, are the opportunity or the encouragement, to the extent possible, of student-driven investigations, not driven investigations. And that's a pretty powerful thing, especially in environmental context. And then the ability and the need to write. So we're looking at NextGen, the shifts that are happening in there, and really saying we can make this happen with an environmental context in the background. So some colleagues at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation came up with this graphic that I think nicely describes what we're looking at. So we have these two and many more education reform efforts out there, but we have Next Generation Science Standards, which are a framework of standards and curricula that we use to describe science education anyway. Then we have this MWEE, which is an approach to teaching and learning focused on environmental literacy. And when you look at how these things match up in that graphic on the right-hand side of the screen, there's a lot of similarities. And so we recognize that, and we're trying to capitalize on that in terms of that whole MWEE. So here's question 2. And what I'm hoping to understand through this, again, it's sort of like an audience question. It's like, so where are folks coming from, to this conversation or others? Like, what is your background? And I kind of describe it as the context in which you work. So if you could take a minute and just tell us what in general, or how you would consider the context in which you work. Are you a field educator, classroom educator, what have you? And so we can just get a sense of the folks that are out there. So I'll turn it over to Bruce to say go, or maybe people can just go.
Yep, folks can just go. And while folks are filling out that poll over the next moment or so, Bart, there were a number of folks who had asked some questions regarding the links in order to access a number of the resources that you pointed out earlier. So maybe you might quickly add a slide toward the end that you might be able to pull up with some of those links that folks could access them when they view the archive later on.
Yeah, I can totally do that. Sorry. And I am going to point to kind of the one, in terms of the meaningful watershed education experience, the place to go to. I'm going to be calling that one out specifically in a little bit.
Great. Okay, so we've gotten most of our folks have voted. Just another few seconds here on the line, and we'll close it up. Okay. Let's see what we've got.
All right, great. Awesome.
Terrific.
Yeah, so a lot of formal ed, classroom educators. That's great. Second, you can all see the results there. And I always struggle personally with the language of education, right? Informal versus non-formal versus formal, which is one of the things that we had long conversations about in terms of the development of the whole MWEE piece. And we deliberately kind of just broke it down into those like classroom-based learning, because it's actually about the students, and field-based learning, which can happen in multiple contexts, whether that's outside by a stream or in a museum or a zoo, what have you, that connects all that sort of stuff. So thank you. Thanks for sharing where you're from. And that's great. So, so I mentioned this early, that we consider the MWEE to be an approach that addresses kind of several goals. And so, the MWEE has the potential, this environmental situated context, to increase student engagement. I've had the opportunity to have a couple conversations with students about things like climate change or actual phenomenon that you see right out there. Or that those kind of things happening right around us, we often find to be pretty engaging. Because of all the stuff that I was talking about in terms of connections to next generation science standards and stuff like that, we hope and we hope some of the work that the MWEE can do is help support standards-based student achievement. So these rich opportunities for kind of honest to goodness three-dimensional learning. And because of all the change around us that we're experiencing, because of emerging job opportunities that exist out there, whether that's green building stuff or maybe even more effective communication between diverse audiences, we consider that the MWEE is an opportunity to advance 21st century learning skills. That's part of what it's supposed to do. And then ultimately, through the learning, through the experiences, through having a robust kind of connection and context to where you are and places around you and how connected they are to you, that responsibility will ultimately emerge as one of the endpoints. So this is all the work that we're expecting folks that are going through this whole MWEE process to do. And I would be, so hopefully, and I bet you're getting a sense of how, I'm gonna call it big, but how big these meaningful watershed education experiences are. And whenever you're doing anything of this size and scale, it's really important to think about what is that ecosystem of educators and education out there that really makes this stuff happen. And again, the end goal is student environmental literacy, or these MWEEs, but the folks that are all equally important, I would say, kind of revolve around each one of these spheres that I put up there on the screen. So field-based educators with content knowledge about local environments and experience taking students outside in safe but engaging ways. Classroom educators who are hugely skilled at being able to help students understand core learning topics and provide meaningful ways of organizing that learning so that students get out of it what we hope they get out of it and have to get out of it in a lot of cases. The curriculum and those that put together a curriculum, one of the challenges with the meaningful watershed education experience has been that if you see it as something outside of what you're, I'm going to say required, I'm not sure that's the right word, but required to do because of the curriculum, then oftentimes it's a really hard thing to get done. Even though as the classroom educator, field educator, whoever, you think it's a great idea, you think it's really good learning, you think it's really positive for your students, but if it's outside of what you have to do, being able to do it can often be challenging. So having, we call it the MWEE being systemically integrated within the program, part of the conversation is a very important piece. And then because a lot of times this involves taking students out of the classroom, maybe even going to distant sites within your region, there's a really important element of institutional support that is key here. A lot of us can't get a whole lot done unless the principals and the institution itself is on board, regardless of whether or not there's any Chesapeake Bay wide goal of promoting environmental literacy. If a principal is having a hard time, focused more on literacy, like literacy itself, being able to read and write, then it's going to be hard to get out of that classroom. So the whole point of all this is if we can get these different spheres of folks working together on developing and implementing the MWEE, then as intended, the MWEE is not something that happens outside of what students are, required or have to do, right? It's all a way of doing that stuff. So the MWEE itself has a number of parts to it, and I was going to dig into these parts a little bit just to kind of give you a sense of what is what the full model of the MWEE is, and you can kind of see what they are here. So the four key essential elements, and these are things that students should be intimately involved in and almost student-centered or student-driven if possible. That's things like issue definition, outdoor field-based experiences, synthesis and conclusion, and action components. So before I dig into those, here's one of those links that I promised I would share. Really, the best place to go to learn about MWEEs right now and into the future will be this website, baybackpack.com. And it's got a lot of resources there for folks in the Chesapeake Bay region, but like I said, if the MWEE is indeed, and I believe it is, a model for environmental literacy programming that exists out there, then this, there's a whole tab right here on this website that helps describe the MWEE. So baybackpack.com is one of those sites to check out and bookmark. All right, so what is issue definition? So what that looks like is students are focusing on a driving question that has to be tied to something that's locally relevant, some issue that is happening right around them, or a phenomenon that they can actually see, touch, feel, smell, whatever. The learning about that issue happens both in the classroom and in the field, and is not just about field educators or classroom educators, but also being able to bring people in the community in as experts, or and documentation, whether that's news articles or news reports or other writings. All those type of publications is all about doing the background research, understanding as to the greatest depth possible the issue that's going on. And then the other powerful pieces about issue definition is that it allows us to connect to personal or as groups or communities and public values. So you start thinking about how you are connected to whatever this problem, phenomenon, issue is from both like your perspective and others. And I can't stress how important I feel this notion of empathy really is for us in the education community and the environmental education community in particular. And I think this tries to get to some of that. And so what does it look like? This does look like classroom instruction. It does look like the collection of data out there in the field, or within, even as we do a lot of times within the research community, like we're online collecting data from observation systems that exist out there. Students can do that too. Talking to experts, reviewing credible publications. The second essential element of the MWEE is outdoor field experiences. And again, so connecting students to place, that situated learning notion, it really gets locked in when students have the opportunity to have outdoor experiences that are, sufficient is how we describe it, but they provide enough time and enough latitude for students to really be able to investigate that issue, problem, or phenomenon. So it could be just one time outside looking at turbidity in the stream, or it could be multiple trips in different parts of the watershed to fully understand that. It's really based on what the resources are available, what the student's interested is, and the available, the resources you can pull out. But the whole point is, like, that outdoor field investigation is not an isolated field trip. It's directly connected to that issue you identified and helps you answer those questions, as well as potentially inform actions of how you're going to deal with whatever problem you might find. And I do want to stress that when we talk, it's awesome to go to, an island in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay to learn from both the people that live out there and the environment around it. But that's not accessible necessarily to everybody. And really, you can look at resources on your own schoolyard or that property or nearby in the community that will help you to understand the issue and stuff like that. So it doesn't have to be far-flung field trips. I'm not even going to use the word field trips, field experiences. It can be right there in the schoolyard, depending on what your question is. The next essential element is this thing we call synthesis and conclusions. So what that's all about is claims, evidence, and reasoning, right? So being able to apply the stuff that you learned, the stuff that you've seen, the data you've collected, and organize it in a meaningful way for both yourself and your work, but also for the ability to communicate about that stuff to others. And that's a key piece of students being able to kind of own the work that they're doing. And again, this is where that student-centered, student-driven type of conversation comes in. And I want to also point out that each one of these essential elements of the MWEE, they don't happen in sequence. So it's not like you identify the issue first, then you go outside, then you do some synthesis and conclusions around it, and then you do the final piece as an action project. But they can all happen really in any order that makes sense for the students or for the teachers or the school system that's part of it. So that brings me to the last piece, or the last one I'll mention, which is that action projects. So that's, if you've identified an issue or a problem, what can you do about it? And then key to the action piece is that you don't just leave it, but you also kind of think about how effective was this. And actions don't need to be always, planting a habitat for some species that is not frequently found within the schoolyard or elsewhere, right? It could be that for sure. But it can also look like actions that influence everyday choices. So that might be about power we consume or how we deal with waste personally. There's also an opportunity for community engagement, which is things that might be, action items that might be able to kind of get more of the folks around the neighborhood of the school involved in, so a campaign to grow more local food, or civic action, and that gets to the politics of the thing. So, one of the things that I think a lot of us that work in environmental programs realize is that it's really important that people understand how their decisions and their actions influence the world around them, and that they work within the government structure out there to do what they feel is important within those communities, through voting and through being civically active. And I want to mention the Bay Backpack resources again, because not only is it where you go to learn about the MWEs, but Bay Backpack also has a tons of resources. And one of the other resources that is brand new on Bay Backpack and is worth looking at if you get the chance is all about action projects. And this has traditionally been one of the harder pieces of the MWEE. But to support people in getting action projects done, the Chesapeake Bay program partners at the Maryland Association of Environmental and Outdoor Educators, and DNR and others, Maryland Department of Natural Resources and others, have put together the resources available in this site that kind of describes all kinds of school action projects, clean water projects, projects to conserve resources, etc. And they go into quite a bit of detail for each one of those. So if you decided to do, kind of conservation of resources type of project, one of those that comes up is food waste reduction and composting. And you can kind of see on the hand side here all thought about and have resources to support you in doing. And we hope that this resource has been a pretty powerful tool in helping people think about, organize, and implement action projects. And again, it's on the web. It's accessible to educators, students, whomever. So it's one of those things. So those are the four kind of core pieces. And those are all things students are supposed to be really powerfully engaged in. So that's that student-driven or student-centered piece. But there's a big role for us as educators out there, whether you're in the classroom or the field. You're needed in this space, right? Can't do without you. And so we call these the supporting practices, but you can see what they are. Active teacher support to facilitate student learning and make sure that those essential elements are present in the meaningful watershed education experience, and that those elements are not extraneous to the learning that needs to happen, those academic goals. And that's really all about that classroom integration piece too. And then ensuring that the context is relevant, and key also is that it's not a one-off. It's a sustained thing, part of a unit of learning or study, that happens over a period of time is kind of what's been found to be the most powerful. So really, as educator, whether you're in the classroom or in the field, you're the person on the ground. You're the content expert. You're the facilitator. And within the whole MWEE piece, making sure or doing what you as an individual or the organizations around you can do to help help support you in your knowledge, your skills, and as you try to plan and implement these MWEs. That one simply does not just do a MWE, right? It is a big project, and there's a lot that goes into it, but not outside of what the learning that needs to happen, and you know, powerful way to approach environmental literacy. So I'm going to pause there for a drink of water. So all that is just to say, so we have this MWEE model. It's got these essential elements. It's got these supporting practices. And so if you actually want to do one of these things, how can you help organize your thoughts and your thinking around this? And so that's where we came up with the MWEE guide. And I should also mention, like, whenever I say we, this goes back to the Chesapeake Bay program, and there's a lot of folks from a lot of organizations involved in the thinking and the development and the writing about this sort of stuff. So this MWEE guide came out of a collective part of Chesapeake Bay program's environmental literacy group. And the MWEE guide is fundamentally just a tool for connecting both the field and school-based educators in the service of designing and implementing these MWEs. And in this guide, there's all kinds of tools. And I'm going to just run through them quickly. But one of them is what we call the MWEE Think Cloud. So this is really just a tool to capture ideas about what the MWEE might look like. Like, what are the learning objectives? What are the potential partners? What's the local context that's key out there? In terms of developing, driving, and supporting questions and the content areas they support, there's a form for that to help you think about some of that stuff. And then field sites and those places for that outdoor learning, you know, because they're such an important piece of the MWEE, thinking about how those sites can really robustly support the programming that you want to implement is key. So we try to call attention to that. And maybe you're thinking about options, because certain sites, whether that be the schoolyard or the field site in a local park or have you, like, can it do the work that you want it to do because you've already gone there and checked it out, or your partners have already said, you know, checked it out and said, yes, that issue of cloudy, turbid water exists within this place, so we know there's an opportunity for students to be able to study and identify that issue there. Or, you know, curricularly speaking, like, are we looking for like a place that is directly connected to people and what that influence might be. There's also tools to support as you think about, you know, what are you learning from this? What are your conclusions? Then what actions can you use to address it? And again, you're looking at multiple actions, because all along the way here, every time there's multiple opportunities, you're thinking big and then taking the opportunity to prioritize, you know, based on whatever criteria you want or need to find the thing that's really, really good. So those are some of the basic tools. Probably one of the anchor tools within this MWEE guide is what's called the Environmental Literacy Model, or ELM. And fundamentally, ELM is it's this method of integrating environmental issues, civic action, and academic goals, and putting that all into what is a nice package that encourages education that is three-dimensional or transdisciplinary as well, with hands-on, field-based stuff partnering. And I will say that ELM came out of the Maryland Environmental Literacy Partnership. So that model was developed by educators, partners at Howard Hughes Medical Institution, HHMI. They did a lot of the thinking about taking this on and pulling this together. But we feel that it really works to provide that big picture and a workable template for thinking about the MWEE and the multiple parts of the MWEE and the work that MWEEs are intended to do. So this, you know, this slide is just really about what's in each one of those parts. And you might notice some of the colors that we use within the ELM model being green, blue, and orange. And that is intentionally designed to kind of relate directly back to next generation science standards. The green being the cross-cutting concepts, the blue being the practices, and orange is the disciplinary core ideas within the next gen. Here we kind of think more about it. The orange ends up being, you know, what is our action, what is our claim, and all those pieces. So it's a little outside the DCI thing, but still, those colors are intentional to try and describe that, because the cross-cutting concepts are those overarching things across things. The issue investigation is really where you would employ the practices of science, and civic engagement is where, you know, you would dig into some of the other. And this is just what those documents look like. So just, you know, pages. But the whole point being, these are planning documents. These are tools that were generated by a group of folks that we hope are useful in planning and designing and implementing MWEs and working as a team to do that between non-formal educators, field-based, and classroom-based educators. And then kind of once you have all that stuff under your belt and you're working on it, or maybe you already have a program that is, you know, has those essential elements and those parts of the MWEE. Well, we also wanted to, in the toolkit, provide a way for you to look at your programming and kind of think about, all right, so what are some of the strengths of it, or what can I improve? And so we call it the MWEE audit tool. And so this is designed to help you think about your programming. Is it a MWEE? How close is it? What else can you do? But I want to also harken back to something I mentioned earlier, and that is that regardless, you know, we totally understand, we feel personally, I feel that field-based experiences for students are hugely beneficial. So knowing that the MWEE, at least as folks are developing and working towards it, is a pretty high bar. Like, we don't want to discourage really powerful field experiences for students, and because they have tons of value. But the point of this is just kind of saying that, yes, there is a tool out there to help you evaluate your programming and think about how close it gets to it. So, sorry, one more sip of water. So I just wanted to hit on a couple examples so you could get a sense of what the MWEE looks like. And these are all, I mean, they are coming from the Chesapeake Bay region. So the first example is from Farm, part of the University of Virginia. It's in western-ish Virginia. And the program itself is designed around both geographic and environmental literacy. That's one of the other literacies that I didn't mention earlier, but there's a lot of synergy between those two types of literacy. A lot of it having to do with the sense of place and a context. And for Blandy, the big idea that they had was how, you know, and this is overarching, so how do land use decisions impact our environment, and our environment influence how we can actually use the land. So that was their big idea that they brought to this. And the issue that they came up with was all about that their education programming was expanding at Blandy and at Blandy's property, and they need more teaching space to meet their growing needs. So this is kind of the problem that they posed to the students and teachers. So the fundamental driving question then is, where should Blandy build this education or visitor center? And I think also part of it was it. And so as they kind of worked through the whole issue investigation element, they did all kinds of stuff to try and understand that issue, be aware of that local context, what natural resources exist there, what cultural resources. This is an old historic property with some pretty cool cultural context. And then what would the impacts of building new structures be, and then also be able to collect baseline data around this to identify what areas might be particularly sensitive and be able to tell if things changed over time. And they did some cool other stuff to try and understand the issues. Like the picture on the screen is about a model that they developed looking at runoff from different types of land use. So in each one of the trays on this step ladder is a different kind of soil, a different kind of substrate, some with plants, some with not. And you look at actually the volume of water that flows through there. So there's a really powerful quantitative element to start here. Students, and this is an example of some of the student work, looked at their data of all kinds and went through that synthesis and conclusion process at multiple stages within the program, and kind of just came up to a synopsis of, all right, in this case, what does the critters, the macroinvertebrates in our stream look like? And is our stream one of those super healthy ones with a lot of sensitive organisms, or is it one of those streams that has impact, and so we see organisms that can handle some pollution in there? And they found that, they had some fairly intolerant critters there. Almost over half of the critters in the stream were somewhat intolerant to changes. And I mentioned the cultural piece, and at Blandy Farm, there was a lot of historical connections. One of it even being they had some slave quarters that were there because it was a plantation. And that historical context and where that was brought into thinking about what the education center might look like, be able to hearken back to and support, and where, most importantly, would they be building. And they ultimately decided and proposed that different groups proposed different things. I think the one that got the most buy-in was to say, let's lose the parking lot and build the center there. But the action piece ended up really being a presentation by the students to the State Arboretum Board of Directors. So that's a pretty high-level thing that they were talking with and discussing what their ideas were for where to build this environmental center. And this program is a pretty amazing program, and I know Blandy has worked very, very closely with the teachers in Frederick County, Virginia, to help to design and implement this program. And everybody has gotten a whole. So that was all that program was largely, I would say, the primary driver, although it involved all those pieces of the puzzle that we were talking about earlier, was from a provider side. So somebody that they do a lot of work in environmental literacy programming as part of their role. This second case study is actually a MWEE that's developed by a high school teacher, Hema, in Wacomico, Maryland. So Wacomico is the county. The city that they actually worked in and that she teaches in is Salisbury. And this investigation was actually more of a phenomenon-driven investigation. And again, though, it looked at land use and human impacts. And basically, in 2016, some of the students, that were in her class had their homes flooded. And this is something that's present and provides a lot of context for the students in their community at the time that she was doing this. And so they looked at that flooding issue and what drove it. So they had a driving question of what is the relationship between land use and hydrology in the city of Salisbury. And they looked at tons of background research. They looked at a lot of interactive models online to try and understand watersheds, how they work, how water flow impacts things. And then they did a whole bunch of outdoor stuff to try to understand their community and their schoolyard, from mapping land use around that school and community to the analysis of soil types and testing things like permeability. And ultimately, when they got to the synthesis and conclusions piece, they're thinking about, so how does school contribute to or mitigate flooding? And then what actions could we take to address that? They presented those actions and then ultimately developed and ranked the implementation actions that they could do on the schoolyard to manage flooding, raise awareness around some of the issues. And that involved doing stuff like rain gardens, or BMPs, best management practices to control runoff, and also just kind of raising awareness through cleanup efforts. So those are two examples of some of the MWEEs that existed. This is just about it. But, so we kind of went over what the MWEE is, where it came from, tools to support the development of meaningful watershed education experiences. And I just wanted to let folks know, or just call attention to, that we understand very clearly that MWEEs are part of a much larger context of education. And this table tries to capture, and thank you, Elaine, from Smart Outside, for putting this together, tries to capture, like, what are the different elements of different learning programs or approaches, and what are those steps in each one, and how similar are they? And I think looking at this table, and maybe based on your knowledge of how some of these things work, there's a whole lot of similarity between each one of these things. So in the Chesapeake Bay region, we're trying to encourage folks to think about meaningful watershed education experiences, but that's not a whole lot different than problem-based learning. That's not a whole lot different than wildlife or service learning projects. And when you look at a lesson plan format, so again, MWEs and all these things are bigger than a lesson, but just a lesson plan format like the 5E, like there's a lot of similarities between all that stuff. All this is to say that there's a lot of great education approaches out there, and the MWEE is the one that we're just kind of promoting in the Chesapeake Bay region. So how are we doing? Every other year, we survey the local education agencies around the Chesapeake Bay watershed to try and understand how they're doing in terms of implementing meaningful watershed education experiences. So what each one of these charts describe is how the watershed states that responded to the survey, how are they doing in terms of implementing the MWEE? So in elementary school, almost half, 41%, have system-wide. So that means that within elementary school, system-wide, students are getting their meaningful watershed education experience. Middle school, it's a little higher, 3%, and then high school, it's a little lower, and I think a lot of us will understand that there's challenges working with high schools because of the way courses are typically structured, and students, it's really hard to pull kids out of school in high school at that point. But you can see that just where we're at, and the breakdown is, we break it down into the different states below. So this is the first time that environmental literacy tool, we actually call it the ELIT tool, was used, and this is data from, I think it's 2015 or 16. So we'll be able to now, though, because we have been recording this, track progress over time. So what are our future plans for supporting MWEs? Well, Chesapeake Bay Wet Program and our partners at the Chesapeake Bay Trust and others are working really hard to continue and maintain and encourage and support funding for the implementation of meaningful watershed education experiences out there. So we have a funding element that is being carried out and worked on. We're actually reaching out to other funders and practitioners about this approach nationwide to try and encourage more funding nationally for this type of programming. And then specifically, we are providing in-person trainings about the MWEE. And one of the key things here is that although the MWEE has been around since 2001, there's a lot of different opinions on what it actually means and what it actually is. So we're working really hard right now to come up with the shared and common language for the MWEE, so we're all on the same page, we all know what we're working towards, and we're all speaking the same language. And then we're also working on an online training to support MWEE implementation out there as well, which will include things like videos, interactive discussions, and models like the ones I just showed you of MWEs, and those actual tools filled out and things along those lines. So that's what the meaningful education experience model. So if we have time, actually went longer than I would have thought, but if there's questions out there, Bruce, if you want to chime in, or how it works from here.
Sure. If anyone's got questions they'd like to ask Bart, please feel free to type them into your question box on your GoToWebinar control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. And when they come in, I'll be sure to ask them to Bart for the time that we have left. Bart, one question that I have for you is that the MWEs can take a whole range of time. I know that there are probably some educators that devote, an entire, term to certain MWEs, and others may be able to take, just a few class sessions. What do you feel from what you've seen out there are the average times that most educators spend in sort of developing and implementing MWEs if they're not able to, either for financial reasons or whatever, get students out to a, to a field site for any kind of extended period of time?
All right, so I don't have any specific data on the duration in terms of days that the MWEE is, but so I'll give you my gut check on that. And I don't know if that's helpful, but like if we think about what happens both in the classroom and in the field context, I'd say it's sort of the minimum is around 3 days, and that includes, so 3 days total with the field experience and stuff along those lines in there. I think where we have systemic, so that means across a grade level within one of those grade bands, MWEEs, that they're often around, I'm just guessing, and maybe other people that are on the call that have experienced these, closer to 5 days of class time. And again, that's not like the full class day, right? So that's that hour and a half, 2 hours that you're teaching that subject, most likely science, during the day. So that's my opinion and gut, but I don't, and I can check on any data on the actual duration.
Okay, and one person was asking how you conducted the survey to determine how much content was being taught at the schools.
So that last slide that I showed, so that was a survey that went out to LEAs, so the school districts throughout the entire watershed, and the people that filled that out are the people that are on point for the environmental literacy point of contact in each one of those counties, which is typically the science supervisor, and so they are the ones that took the time to fill out that survey and get back to us on it.
Okay, there are a lot of folks who are coming, as you mentioned, from around the country. Excuse me. And one of the questions was, how would folks begin to implement this, within their own area? How would they be able to access sort of NOAA expertise, depending on where they were, if they wanted to engage in a MWEE?
Yeah. So, that's a great question, and the within NOAA, the programs, the regional programs that offer BWET as a funding vehicle, Bay Watershed Education and Training, I believe all of them are encouraging meaningful watershed education experiences via that funding stream. And so those people that help coordinate those contact within NOAA to connect you to the MWEE. And I'll add, like, one of the reasons why we're trying to put a lot of resources and this toolkit together, to support the MWEEs on the web, is that we really do hope it has, and these planning tools and the online learning that is in development will all have, a bigger reach outside of the Chesapeake Bay region. And we hope they're found to be valuable tools on there. I will say that, within the Chesapeake Bay region, I don't know if it's lucky or been working at it for a while or what have you, or just kind of the right conditions made it possible, but getting some buy-in at multiple levels within folks involved in both education and policy making in the states has been a really valuable and powerful approach for us, so that I would encourage coalitions of folks that are working in other regions, and they probably already are, really, having those conversations. And maybe the MWEE model could be offered up as a model that you could think about adopting and using it really to communicate with the various stakeholders about how folks are thoughtfully approaching environmental literacy. I mean, and like I said, there's other ways to do that out there, but if it's valuable, please take these. I mean, one of the reasons to have the conversation with the Planet Stewards group, right, is if you find this valuable, this is a model that we welcome folks using to the extent they see valuable out there.
So just to follow up, Bart, so a couple of ways that folks could begin to engage in this and also to get NOAA expertise, depending on where they were in the country, would be one, to go to the baybackpack.com site to begin to access the written materials, and then perhaps they could do a Google search just on B, as in the letter B, wet, and NOAA, to find out some information about their regional areas where BWET's offering different funding streams for that, and access that expertise. And also, I don't know if you mentioned it, but I believe that the National Estuarine Research Reserve System through NOAA, or NERRS, as well as the National Marine Sanctuaries around the United States, which are also affiliated with NOAA, have folks that are engaged in these BWET and field-based programs that can be integrated with MWEEs. Am I on the right track there?
I certainly think so. And maybe before you publish this, I can add that slide with those additional links of those networks to consider talking to about this.
Yeah, that would be great. And just know that there are certainly lots of, also on our Google site that I mentioned, along with Bart's bio, there's also his contact information, which is bart.merrick@noaa.gov. And or you can drop there you go, or you could drop a note to me as well at NOAA Planet Stewards. And certainly the kinds of work that NOAA Planet Stewards does certainly encourages the developing and funding these kinds of activities. So that's great. Let's see if there are some more questions that have come in.
I don't know how you check questions. But.
Well, I'm checking them right now. Okay, so while folks, if anybody wants to type some of those in, one of the things that I'm just going to do is, for some folks who came in late, I'm just going to reiterate a few notes that we have. Please, everyone who's been on the line, we're not done yet, but we'll still be taking some questions. Please check your email. You've gotten a link to our post-webinar poll. As soon as we're done here tonight or you log out, please go and complete it. Again, Thursday through Saturday, March 15th through 17th, please join NOAA Planet Stewards at the NSTA National Conference in Atlanta, Georgia. We've got workshop, we've got program sessions, we've got happy hours, we've got a lot more. Go to the link on the Planet Stewards website, check it out, it's going to be great. Monday, March 26th, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, we have our next book club, Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life. Wonderful book written by E.O. Wilson, not only a remarkable researcher and theoretician, but Pulitzer Prize winner too. Would you like to join this discussion? Please contact pegstephan@gmail.com. Though she's left our program and NOAA, she is still working with us, and we are so grateful for that. And again, I've made a mistake here. On Monday, April 9th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, our next webinar that was originally scheduled for this evening, Extreme Weather Preparedness. Okay, and we'll now go and just take another look to see if any other questions have come in for Bart right now. Oh, okay, some questions here. Bart, how is the MWEE Educator's Guide set up? Does it give example curriculum?
So at this point, because of the scale of the thing, it doesn't give a lot about essential elements, supporting practices, and then the tools and how to use them. The idea being that the toolkit, the MWEE guide, is kind of the top level of stuff, and then we're working, like I said, to kind of put together those videos, those model ELM environmental literacy model documents out there, and that will be served up in part through Bay Backpack. So not ready yet, but on its way.
Okay, and
thank you, though. You're totally recognize that it needs to be a priority. It is a priority.
Oh boy. Okay, so here's a slightly longer question. In the Chesapeake Bay, particularly on the eastern shore, you operate in an area that's a touchstone to important national human history. And this person's thinking about the new Harriet Tubman Center and the fact that Frederick Douglass was born on the eastern shore. Question is, do you work to help students understand how the natural landscape, and in particular the watershed, played a role in their development?
So, I mean, In the programming that we offer, absolutely. Within the context of the meaningful watershed education experiences, we really hope, because the intent of MWEs is that it is reflective of people's culture, people's history, because it's situated, right? It's about the place and about that learning, that it will have a powerful connection to that culture and will not just be, stovepipe science type thing, right? So I would say, hopefully, that's the output of the MWEs. And within the programming that we do, we absolutely try and do a good, do our best to connect beyond the science to the people as well. But you're absolutely right. A lot of stuff touchstone place out there.
So really working to try and engage a focus with both social sciences and history and anthropology areas, as well as with what we might consider more of the hard sciences and the scientific inquiry process.
Yeah, I mean, that's the situated learning. That's the story behind having education happen in a place, about a place, and those people that call that place home. That's why it's so important, that situated learning piece of environmental literacy programming in general, and the MWEE specifically.
So we have one question here, which Christina asks: most upper elementary classrooms are required to teach persuasive or problem/solution essays. Are you aware of any groups who are trying to develop materials for teachers that will help them use conservation topics for their essays?
Groups that are doing it, I can think of examples like the Blandy Farm one. Like, that's exactly what they did, is that the students had to come up with persuasive essays about why and where to build that environmental education center. So there's examples. But yeah, that's a great question. Are there organizations that are specifically dedicating time to coming up with those conservation, environmental literacy oriented examples for persuasive writing? And I am not aware of any that specifically do that, but that maybe others on the call are. I'm not.
Okay.
That's a great question, though. Be nice to find that. So if you identify it, good to know.
Well, thanks again, Bart. I really appreciate you taking the time this evening for really letting us know a lot more about the current state of MWEs and all of these well thought out and developed resources that, for helping educators to develop these plans and programs, and how they sort of engage in this interactive crosscut with three-dimensional learning. I think it's very, very valuable.
So it was my pleasure, and I'll just add that, if folks, my email was up on that screen. I welcome conversations about this. I really do. So, and folks that I work with, Shannon Sprague, Kevin Chabot, Elise Trelligan, we all would be happy to have a conversation about this stuff if desired, or point you in a direction like those resources that folks were asking for. And maybe we can find stuff like that.
Great, and we'll be sure to, and I'll make sure that everybody has, your contact information, that you can, reach out to those folks afterwards. And one thing that I just forgot to mention, for those of you who may have been on some of these webinars before, is that there's a terrific resource which is available for all educators to use in the classroom, and it's the NOAA Ocean Today website that has a series of both environmental and scientific and technology-based videos for use in the classroom. And something which has been relatively new over the last year or so has been a series called Every Full Moon. And every 28 or 29 days, a series of videos is organized and put together among a single topic, and they're truly fascinating. This one that's just come out a couple days ago, Adventures of a Marine Archaeologist, they delve not only into the science of marine archaeology, but also into the history, into a lot of the a lot of the things that we're interested in beyond just science. So really, really worth checking out for everyone who might want to. There are over something like 230 or 240 videos that are out there, and many are even translated, have translations for Spanish too. So definitely worth checking out. Well, and with that, I have our sort of final Zen picture of the day to everyone to go out on a good feeling. And Bart, I'm going to give you the last word here.
Yeah, I'd say thank you, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity, and the picture's great. Good feeling, unless you're the fish that thing's hunting. Right.
Right.
But hey, no. But thank you, everybody, and please, don't hesitate to reach out.
All right. And with that, I bid everyone a very good evening. Go to your email, answer our post-webinar survey, and we'll see you next month, if not sooner. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The shark, baby, has such teeth, dear, and it shows them pearly white. Just a jackknife has old Maggie Heath, baby, and it keeps it out of sight.